Maybe Omri ought to tell someone about Little Bear. The trouble was that although grown-ups usually knew what to do, what they did was very seldom what children wanted to be done. What if they took the Indian to, say, some scientist or whoever knew about strange things like that, who would question him and examine him and probably keep him in a laboratory or something of that sort? They would certainly want to take his cupboard away, too, and then Omri wouldn't be able to have any more fun with it all. Just when his mind was seething with ideas, such as putting in plastic bows and plastic arrows and horses and maybe even other little people, well, no, probably that was too risky. Who knew what sort you might end up with? They might start fighting with each other. But still, he knew for certain he didn't want to give up his secret. Not yet, no matter how many Frenchmen had been scalped. Having made his decision, for the moment anyway, Omri turned to go upstairs, discovering only halfway up that the tin of corned beef was practically empty. Still, there was a fair-sized bit left in the bottom. It ought to do. Little Bear was nowhere to be seen. But when Omri called him softly, he ran out from under the bed and stood waving both arms at Omri. "Bring meat?" "Yes." Omri put it on the miniature plate he cut the night before, and he placed it before the Indian, who seized it in both hands and began gnawing on it. "Very good. Soft. Your wife cook this?" Omri started laughing. "I haven't got a wife." The Indian stopped and looked at him. "Omri, not got wife? Who grow your corn? Who grind? Who cook? Who make your clothes?" "My mother," said Omri, still laughing. "Have you got a wife, then?" The Indian looked away. After a moment, he said, "No." "Why not?" "Dead," said Little Bear shortly. "Oh." The Indian finished eating in silence and then stood up, wiping his greasy hands on the sides of his trousers. "Now, do magic. Make things for Little Bear." "What do you want?" "Gun," he said. "White man gun, like English soldiers." Omri's brain raced. If a tiny knife could stab, a tiny gun could shoot. Maybe it couldn't do much harm, but then again, maybe it could. "No, no gun, but I can make you a bow and arrow. I'll have to buy plastic ones, though. What else would you like? A horse?" "Horse," said Little Bear. "Don't you ride? I thought all Indians rode." Little Bear shook his head. "Iroquois don't need horse. Iroquois walk." "But wouldn't you like to ride a horse?" Little Bear stood quite still, frowning, wrestling with this idea. At last he said, "Maybe. Show horse. Then I see." Omri rummaged in his biscuit tin. There were a number of horses in there, big heavy ones for carrying armored knights, smaller ones for pulling gun carriages in the Napoleonic Wars, several cavalry horses. Those might be the best. Omri ranged 5 or 6 of various sizes and colors before Little Bear, whose black eyes started shining. "I have," he said. "You mean all of them?" Little Bear nodded hungrily. "No, that's too much. I can't have herds of horses galloping in my room. You can choose one." "One?" said Little Bear. "One." Little Bear then made a very thorough examination of every horse, feeling their legs, running his hands over their rumps, looking straight into their plastic faces. At last he selected a smallish brown horse with 2 white feet that had originally, as far as Omri could remember, carried an Arab brandishing a curved sword with French legionnaires. Omri lifted the cupboard onto the floor, shut the horse inside, and turned the key. Almost at once they could hear the clatter of tiny hooves on the metal shelf. They looked at each other with joyful faces. "Open! Open door!" said Little Bear. Omri lost no time in doing so. There, prancing and pawing the white paint, was a lovely, shiny-coated little brown horse. As the door swung open, he shied nervously, turning his face and prickling his ears so far forward they almost met his face. His tiny nostrils flared, and his black tail plumed above his haunches as he gave a high, shrill neigh. "Aye!" cried Little Bear. In a moment he had vaulted over the bottom edge of the cupboard, and as the horse reared in fright, he jumped into the air under its flying hoofs, and he grasped the leather reins. The horse fought to free its head, but Little Bear hung on with both hands. Even as the horse plunged and bucked, the Indian had moved from the front to the side. He grasped the high pommel of his saddle, and he swung himself into it. He ignored the stirrups, holding on by gripping with his knees. The horse flung himself back on his haunches. Then he threw himself forward in a mighty buck, head low, heels flying. To Omri's dismay, Little Bear, instead of clinging on, came loose and flew through the air in a curve, landing on the carpet just beyond the edge of the cupboard. Omri thought his neck must be broken, but he landed in a somersault, and he was instantly back on his feet. The face he turned to Omri was shining with happiness. "Crazy horse!" he cried with fierce delight. The crazy horse was meanwhile standing quite still, reins hanging loose, looking watchfully at the Indian through wild, wide apart eyes. Little Bear made no sudden moves. He stood quite still for a long time, just looking at the horse. Then so slowly you could scarcely notice, he edged towards him, making strange hissing sounds between his teeth that almost seemed to hypnotize the horse. Inch by inch he moved, softly, cautiously, until he and the horse stood almost nose to nose. Then quite calmly Little Bear reached up and laid his hand on the horse's neck. That was all. He did not hold on to the reins. The horse could have jumped away, but he didn't. He raised his nose a little so that he and the Indian seemed to be breathing into each other's nostrils. Then, in a quiet voice, Little Bear said, "Now, horse, mine. Crazy horse, mine." Still moving slowly, though not as slowly as before, he took the reins and he moved alongside the horse. After a certain amount of fiddling, he found out how to unbuckle the straps that held on the saddle, and he lifted it off, and he laid it on the floor. The horse snorted and tossed his head, but he didn't move. Hissing gently now, the Indian first leaned his weight against the horse's side. Then he lifted himself up by his arms until he was astride. Letting the reins hang loose on the horse's neck, he squeezed with his legs. The horse moved forward, as tame and obedient as you please, and the pair rode once around the inside of the cupboard, as if it was a circus arena. Suddenly, Little Bear caught up the reins and pulled them to the side, turning the horse's head at the same time, and gave him a kick. The horse wheeled and bounded forward towards the edge of the cupboard. The metal rim was up to the small horse's chest, like a 5-barred gate to a full-sized horse. There was no room to ride straight from the back of the cupboard to the front, so Little Bear rode diagonally, a very difficult angle, yet the horse cleared it in a flying leap. Omri realized at once that the carpet was too soft for him. His feet simply sank into it like soft sand. "Need ground, not blanket," said Little Bear. "Blanket no good for ride." Omri looked at his clock. It was still only a little after 6 in the morning, at least another hour before anyone else would wake up. "I could take you outside," he said hesitantly. "Good," said Little Bear, "but not touch horse. You touch, much fear." Omri quickly found a small cardboard box that held a matchbox car. It even had a window through which he could see what was happening inside. He laid that on the carpet with the ends open. Little Bear rode his horse into the box, and Omri carefully shut up the end more and carefully lifted it. Then, in his bare feet, he carried the box slowly down the stairs and let himself out through the back door. It was a lovely, fresh spring morning. Omri stood on the back steps with the box in his hands, looking round for a suitable spot. The lawn wasn't much good. The grass would be over the Indian's head in most places. The terrace at the foot of the steps was no use, with its hard, uneven bricks and cracks between them. But the path was beaten earth and small stones, real riding ground if they were careful. Omri walked to the path and laid the matchbox carton down. For a moment he hesitated. Could the Indian run away? How fast could a small horse run? As fast as a mouse? If so, and they wanted to escape, Omri wouldn't be able to catch them. A cat, on the other hand, would. Omri knelt on the path in his pajamas and put his face to the cellophane window. The Indian stood inside holding the horse's head. Little Bear, he said, we're outdoors now. I'm going to let you out to ride. But remember, you're not on the prairie now. There are mountain lions here, but they're big enough to swallow you whole, and your horse too. Don't run away. You would not survive. Do you understand? Little Bear looked at him steadily and nodded. Omri opened the flap, and the Indian and horse stepped out into the morning sunlight. So this book doesn't have a lot of pictures, but Lynn Banks gave us a little sketch here, and Miss Brian's a little backwards here, but you can kind of see Little Bear and Crazy Horse practicing their walking inside the shelves of the cupboard there, and the saddle that he has taken off. So we'll have to wait over the weekend and wonder what happens when Little Bear and Crazy Horse ride outside with mountain lions. Have a good weekend.